The work that goes into crafting an all-timer scene in a horror movie is staggering, frankly. It requires a filmmaker, cast, and crew working in perfect tandem to deliver something that leaves audiences with a cinematic memory they'll never forget. Sometimes the things happening on the periphery and behind the scenes, though, are just as creepy and unsettling as those that occur on it, as is categorically confirmed by the following 10 movie moments. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 horror movie moments more terrifying when you know the truth. Number 10. Bill's death left Harry Crosby partially blind for months. Friday the 13th. The penultimate death in the original Friday the 13th sees camp counselor Bill's corpse being discovered by final girl Alice. His brutalized remains pinned to a door with his throat cut and an arrow sticking out of his eye. To achieve the effect of Bill being shot through the eye, though, actor Harry Crosby, son of Bing, believe it or not, wore a makeup prosthetic. But due to the low-budget nature of the production, makeup designer Tom Savini ended up using cheap, unsafe ingredients for fake blood. This included the wetting agent Kodak Photo Flow, which then seeped from the prosthetic eye into Crosby's real eye, causing him to feel intense pain and then be rushed to the hospital. According to Crosby himself, he was left blind in his eye for around 6 months, though thankfully made a full recovery eventually. Savini, for his part, later said that this, quote, wasn't a proud moment for him. And so, whenever you marvel at that gnarly gore effect in the future, know the real pain and months of trauma that went into it. Number 9. JoBeth Williams went swimming with real skeletons. Poltergeist. Now, this one is iconic. One of Poltergeist's most unforgettable moments, of course, occurs when Diane Freeling slips into her swimming pool, and because being immersed in muddy water apparently isn't gross enough, she's soon greeted by a bunch of skeletons buried underneath it. Ever since the film's release, there have been persistent discussions about the so-called Poltergeist curse, that the production was assailed by so much bad luck that it must surely have been the result of a pissed-off spirit. But one of these dubious claims actually ended up being true. That, without actress JoBeth Williams' knowledge, the skeleton props used for the harrowing sequence were in fact totally real. In a 2008 TV interview, Williams said, quote, "You have to understand that this sequence took probably 4 or 5 days to shoot. In my innocence and naivete, I assumed that these were not real skeletons," end quote. Now, why would you assume that, JoBeth? She later went on to say that they were indeed real skeletons because they were cheaper to get. Number 8. The angiogram scene features a future murderer, the Exorcist. One of the most unassuming scenes that's caused the most visceral responses has to be the one where Reagan undergoes a cerebral angiography in an attempt to deduce the cause of her behavior. The perceived realism of the procedure as depicted in the film lends it a disturbingly skin-crawling quality, one that's made even worse once you know the future destiny of one of the actors involved. That's because the actor playing the radiological technician is a man called Paul Bateson, a real radiologist who in 1977, 4 years after the film's release, murdered a journalist called Addison Verrill. Bateson was also viewed as a person of interest in a number of other killings in New York City at the time, though never decisively tied to any of them, despite some continuing to incorrectly label him as a serial killer. Number 7. Betty Buckley was genuinely terrified of an untested prop, Carrie. Carrie's iconic climax is absolute incredible nightmare fuel as the title character wreaks telekinetic havoc on the assembled prom night party. One of the more brutal deaths is afforded to Carrie's poor gym teacher, Miss Collins, who during Carrie's outburst is crushed to death by a falling basketball backboard. Now, actress Betty Buckley certainly sells the terror of Miss Collins' impending demise incredibly well, and that's because Buckley was genuinely scared of the rigged backboard prop hitting her for real, given that it hadn't been adequately tested prior to shooting. Buckley said in an interview with Vulture, quote, "This contraption they built for Miss Collins' death scene was a basketball backboard that was on a pendulum. They planned it so that we shot 4 takes with the pendulum falling and then stopping right before it hit me, and that was very scary. So what you're seeing on film is not acting at all. I'm absolutely terrified because they had not tested out the machine." Number 6, Betsy Baker was blindly swinging a real dagger at Bruce Campbell, the Evil Dead. It's a little secret that Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead was a seat-of-the-pants production, with Raimi employing every corner-cutting trick in the book to wring as much production value as possible out of his $375,000 budget. Of the movie's many memorable moments, though, you'll surely recall Ash fending off his possessed girlfriend Linda in the third act of the movie, when she starts wildly swinging the Sumerian dagger in his direction. But as Campbell confirmed in a commentary track for the film, he's not simply giving a stellar performance pretending to be scared of co-star Betsy Baker. Rather, he's genuinely terrified because Baker's demonic contact lenses prevented her from seeing while shooting the scene, which in combination with a real dagger being used, oh my god, ensured that Campbell had to dodge her or risk getting stabbed for real. Yeah, he didn't have to do much acting in this scene, did he? Number 5, the helicopter crash was a genuine accident, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Now, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes may be a deeply silly horror comedy, but there's a moment early in the film that's genuinely anxious to watch once you know the behind-the-scenes hoopla. In the opening minutes of the movie, we see the police doing battle with the titular Killer Tomatoes in a field. All the while, a helicopter loses control in the air, crashes to the ground, and flips over. But as it turns out, this was a genuine accident and not at all something that was intended to be part of the movie. The pilot legitimately lost control of the chopper, crashed it, rolled it over, and it indeed burst into flames. The pilot was thankfully able to evacuate the vehicle without harm, and so quick-thinking director John DeBello decided to work the unexpected incident into the story. The director used the footage of the crash and even filmed extra clips of the burning wreckage, while adding in dialogue about a tomato jumping into the chopper. And though nobody was ultimately harmed, thankfully, knowing how easily disaster could have struck makes watching this otherwise amusing scene rather queasy. Number 4, Marilyn Burns' finger was cut for real, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. By all accounts, making the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a thoroughly miserable experience, as is evidently reflected in its grimy, makes-you-want-to-shower aesthetic. And no scene proved more harrowing for the cast or crew than the iconic dinner sequence, where the murderous Sawyer family toys with final girl Sally Hardesty, even cutting her finger so that the incomprehensibly alive Grandpa Sawyer can suck the blood out of it, the dirty old fart that he is. Though the scene was unpleasant for all involved, being shot for an entire 24-hour day in intense Texas heat, actress Marilyn Burns, of course, took by far the worst of it, given the difficulty involved in filming the finger cut. Because the blood squib attached to the prop knife malfunctioned, Leatherface actor Gunnar Hansen decided to just do it the hard way, cutting Burns' finger with a razor for real. Number 3, most of the cast had diarrhea during shooting. Predator. Predator is a gut-wrenchingly suspenseful sci-fi horror action film, and one that somehow becomes even more nervously anxious once you know the dire straits that the cast went through during the shoot. See, most of the cast and crew suffered severe bouts of diarrhea while filming due to drinking contaminated water in their Mexican hotel. And in recent years, Arnold Schwarzenegger himself even admitted that on one occasion, he actually shat trow while working out before the day's shoot. It's been said that the cast's constant fear of following in Arnie's footsteps created a tense atmosphere on set throughout shooting, in turn only amplifying the palpable fear felt by the central characters facing off against the titular creature. And that's because at any moment, you're watching a group of muscle-bound grunts absolutely petrified that they're about to drop an involuntary deuce mid-scene. Number 2, Alex Wolff intentionally dislocated his jaw. Hereditary. Throw a dart and you'll probably find a scene in Ari Aster's Hereditary that's imprinted on the minds of horror fans forevermore. And while far from the most immediately traumatic scene, who can forget the disturbing beat where Peter loses control of his body at school and brutally slams his head on the desk? Though the desk was obviously padded for the stunt, the most disturbing part of the scene is seeing Peter's increasingly contorted face leading up to the desk hit, which is kinda grotesque enough to suggest that prosthetic work must have done the heavy lifting. But believe it or not, this was mostly all Alex Wolff's doing, who took advantage of a pre-existing injury to briefly dislocate his jaw for the scene. In an interview, he said, quote, "I boxed for 3 years and I dislocated my jaw. To preface that, no special effects are done in that scene. I dislocated my jaw, and then I held my breath for about a minute and pushed out as hard as I could, so my face was all red and almost purple in that scene, because I was holding my breath for so long. And I remember seeing stars and the cameras pushing in, so I did that, and then we glued my eyelid back and glued my lip up," end quote. The end result is certainly impressive and proof of how something most unexpected can add something totally incredible, if gnarly, to a scene. Number 1. Lorenza Izzo almost drowned while getting swept away. The Green Inferno. As embattled protagonist Justine Lorenza Izzo, Shua gets put through the physical ringer in Eli Roth's cannibal Holocaust homage, The Green Inferno. But somehow the experience was even worse than it looks. See, near the end of the film, Justine is swept down a river while trying to escape her cannibal captors. And while you might assume that Izzo had a stunt double for the scene, or that the stunt was at least performed under extremely controlled circumstances, well, that wasn't quite the case. I mean, hell, you're 10 entries into a list with this title, you know what you're getting in for now. Izzo did indeed perform the scene herself, and, per the untamable nature of the very real river, was simply at nature's mercy to the extent that she very nearly drowned. In an interview with Yahoo, director Roth confirmed this, saying, quote, "Lorenza Izzo almost drowned in the river during a take, and yes, we used it in the film. We had a safe word for her to yell, but it was so loud that when she was screaming it at the top of her lungs, none of us heard her. When you see her clinging to the rock screaming, that's real," end quote. Outside of this context, it's certainly a believably terrified performance, and now we all know why. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Did you know about the reality of these sequences, and are there any crazy true stories I missed off here? Let me know, and while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to What Culture Horror for more lists like this on the regular. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.